Chapter 1. The Bloodmoon Dread. The air inside the low stone cabins of the Bloodmoon Pack smelled of two things: iron-rich copper and burning sage. For 19 years, that suffocating scent had been my savior. Tonight, it was the only thing keeping the executioner's blade from my throat. I pressed the heavy granite pestle into the wooden bowl, grinding the dried silverleaf roots until they became a fine, shimmering black powder. My hands were shaking so violently the stone clicked against the wood, a frantic, erratic sound in the quiet cabin. I forced my breathing to slow, counting the beats of my heart. 1, 2, 3. Outside, the drums had already begun. They were deep, guttural thuds that vibrated through the floorboards, matching the panicked pulse in my veins. The Blood Moon ceremony was only 3 hours away. Every eligible unmated wolf in the territory was currently washing away the scent of the pine forest, putting on their finest silks, and praying to the moon goddess to grant them a powerful fated match. I was praying for the exact opposite. I was praying to remain invisible. I was praying to be broken. A sharp, agonizing sting flared across my wrists, so intense it made my breath catch in my throat. I dropped the pestle. It rolled across the table, leaving a streak of black dust in its wake. Pulling back the heavy sleeves of my oversized tunic, a cold dread settled deep in my stomach. Underneath my skin, the veins around my wrists weren't a healthy human blue. They were pulsing a dangerous neon violet. Little sparks of static electricity danced along my fingertips, snapping against the wood. "Not tonight," I whispered, my voice cracking with terror into the empty room. "Please, Great Mother, not tonight." I grabbed the bowl of crushed roots, tipped it back, and swallowed the bitter powder dry. It tasted like ash and battery acid, scorching my throat. Immediately, a wave of suffocating, icy cold rushed through my chest, freezing the magic back down into the dark corners of my soul. The violet light in my veins dimmed, fading back into the pale, deceptive skin of my wrists. I collapsed against the table, chest heaving, tears of absolute frustration stinging my eyes. I was a monster. An anomaly. A heretic. In our world, wolves and witches were locked in an ancient blood feud, separated by centuries of slaughter and deep-seated hatred. Wolves relied on physical dominance, the sacred purity of the pack, and the laws of nature. Witches manipulated the arcane, casting spells that alphas viewed as a corrupt, unnatural sickness. The two bloodlines were never, under any circumstances, supposed to mix. Yet, here I was, Seraphina, an Omega servant to the Bloodmoon Pack by day, and a creature fighting her own forbidden bloodline by night. If Alpha Jaxon ever discovered what was hiding beneath my quiet, submissive exterior, he wouldn't just banish me, he would put me on the pyre to keep his pack's lineage pure. A heavy, booming knock shattered the silence, the force of it rattling the wooden hinges of my door. It swung open before I could even stand. Standing in the threshold was Cora, the lead beater's daughter. She looked flawless, an alpha blood elite wrapped in a silk dress the color of fresh blood, her dark hair pinned back with polished silver clips. She looked down her nose at me, her gaze sweeping over my stained apron and tangled curls with visceral disgust. "Still playing with your dirt and weeds, Seraphina?" Cora sneered, her voice dripping with the effortless disdain of the privileged. "Hurry up. The Alpha has commanded all Omegas to line up at the eastern edge of the ritual grounds. We are on a strict schedule, and I won't have a pathetic, wolfless servant delaying the Pack's greatest night." I kept my eyes glued to the floorboards, lowering my head in a practiced, humiliating show of submission. "I am sorry, Cora. I am coming right now." "Make sure you stay at the very back," Cora added, turning her back on me with a sharp flick of her hair. "Alpha Jaxon is stepping up to the altar tonight to find his true Luna. The last thing he needs to see is a broken, half-blooded Omega ruining the view." She slammed the door, leaving me in the dimming light. I let out the breath I had been holding, my ribs aching. I stripped off my stained apron and pulled a simple, dark gray linen dress over my head. No jewelry, no makeup. I didn't want to stand out. I wanted to blend into the shadows of the forest, to be nothing more than a ghost. 10 minutes later, I walked out into the cool night air. The Bloodmoon territory was breathtaking, built into the side of a jagged mountain range known as the Whispering Crags. Massive pine trees towered over ancient stone pathways, illuminated by iron lanterns. But tonight, the ambient lanterns weren't necessary. High above the canopy, the moon was enormous, painted in a deep, bleeding shade of crimson. As I walked toward the sacred ritual grounds, the sheer pressure in the air made my ears pop. The lunar energy was a physical weight, pressing down on the back of my neck, demanding the shift. Every wolf I passed was restless, their eyes flashing their inner beta or warrior colors, their inner beasts clawing at the surface. When I reached the clearing, the sheer scale of the pack was suffocating. Hundreds of wolves stood in concentric circles around a massive, elevated stone altar. At the very center of the altar burned a towering bonfire, its embers dancing up toward the blood-red sky like angry sparks. I moved silently through the crowd, slipping toward the furthest, darkest edge of the clearing where the lowest-ranking Omegas stood, hoping the shadows would hold me. Suddenly, the drums stopped. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy enough to drown in. Not even the wind dared to stir the pine needles. From the shadows of the grand pack house, a figure emerged. The crowd parted instantly, every single wolf bowing their head in deep, instinctive reverence. Alpha Jaxon. He was a mountain of a man, standing well over 6 feet tall, with a broad muscular frame covered in a heavy leather warrior's coat. His jawline was sharp enough to cut glass, and his dark eyes were cold, calculating and predatory. He possessed the kind of terrifying, absolute authority that could make a lesser wolf drop to their knees with a single glance. He was a man obsessed with power, legacy and perfection. Jaxon strode up the stone steps of the altar, his heavy boots echoing in the silent night like cracks of thunder. He stopped in front of the bonfire, the firelight casting long, demonic shadows across his face. "Pact, brothers and sisters!" Jaxon's voice boomed, carrying a supernatural frequency that made the very ground beneath my bare feet vibrate. "Tonight, under the gaze of the blood moon, we honor the ancient laws. Tonight the goddess will choose the woman who will stand by my side, bear my heirs, and lead the Bloodmoon Pack into a new era of dominance." The crowd erupted into a ferocious, bloodthirsty roar, wolves throwing their heads back to howl at the crimson sky. Jaxon raised his hand, and the silence returned instantly. He closed his eyes, inhaling deeply, letting the magic of the blood moon activate the fated mate bond. I stood at the very back of the crowd, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The silver leaf root I had swallowed was fighting a losing battle. The sheer cosmic power of the moon was tearing through my internal defenses, stripping away the medicine, clawing at the magic hidden in my soul. Jaxon took a step forward, his eyes still closed. He was tracking the scent. Tracking the invisible thread of destiny. He began to walk down the altar steps, moving toward the front rows where the high-ranking beta and alpha females stood. Cora was standing there, her chin held high, a confident, beautiful smirk on her lips. Jaxon bypassed her entirely. He didn't even look at her. He kept walking, his steps accelerating, his head turning toward the middle rows. The crowd began to murmur in confusion. He was moving away from the elite. He was heading toward the back. Toward the servants. No, I thought, a cold sweat breaking out across my forehead as a violent tremor shot through my legs. No, no, no. Jaxon's eyes snapped open. They weren't their usual dark brown anymore. They were glowing a brilliant, blinding golden yellow, the mark of an alpha wolf who had locked onto his eternal target. He locked his gaze directly onto the back row, directly onto me. The crowd parted in a wave of sharp gasps and horrified whispers, leaving a wide, empty path between the ruthless alpha and a terrified Omega servant. Jaxon walked down the path, his eyes locked onto mine. With every step he took, a violent, electric shockwave tore through my chest. The fated mate bond snapped into place, locking our souls together with the force of a collapsing star. It was an undeniable, overwhelming pull that made my inner wolf howl in sudden, desperate joy. He was my fated mate. But as the bond locked into place, the sheer, explosive power of it shattered the last of my internal walls. The silverleaf root failed completely, burned away by the heat of the bond. The suppressed magic inside me didn't just wake up, it exploded. A sharp gasp left my lips as my vision instantly shifted from normal to a terrifying, vibrant violet. I felt my teeth sharpen into wolf fangs, but at the exact same moment, the ground beneath my feet began to tremble. Black, thorny vines erupted from the soil around my boots, pulsing with dark, forbidden energy. I pulled my hands up to my chest, trying to hide them, but it was too late. Before the eyes of the entire pack, the veins in my arms lit up like a neon grid, glowing a lethal, brilliant violet. Small bursts of purple lightning crackled across my skin, casting a demonic, ethereal glow over my face. Jaxon froze 3 feet away from me. The golden glow in his eyes instantly died, replaced by a look of absolute, unadulterated horror. He looked at my glowing veins. He looked at the magical vines tearing through the sacred stone at my feet. The silence in the clearing was no longer respectful. It was the silence of a graveyard. What are you? Jaxon whispered, his voice trembling with a potent mixture of rage and deep disgust. He didn't see his fated mate. He saw an abomination. And I knew, in that exact second, that my life was over. Chapter 2. Banished to the wolves. The whispers began like the rustling of dry leaves, spreading through the hundreds of wolves assembled in the clearing, until they grew into a roaring sea of condemnation. Witchcraft. An abomination. Look at her veins. She's a monster. I stood frozen, completely pinned beneath Alpha Jaxon's suffocating glare. The purple lightning still crackled faintly across my knuckles, and the thorny vines coiled tightly around my ankles, reacting to my absolute terror. My soul was screaming, begging for him to reach out, to wrap his arms around me and shield me from the hatred of the pack. The fated mate bond was a living, breathing thing inside my chest, crying out for its other half. But Jaxon didn't move to protect me. His face hardened into a mask of pure, unyielding stone. The disgust in his eyes was a physical blow, cutting deeper than any silver blade ever could. He took a deliberate step backward, severing the physical proximity between us, and turned his back on me to face the crowd. Silence! Jaxon's voice boomed, a wave of pure alpha aura crashing over the clearing. The whispers vanished instantly. The entire pack held its breath, waiting for his judgment. Jaxon turned his cold, predatory gaze back to me. He looked at me not as a woman, and certainly not as his fated Luna. He looked at me like a disease that needed to be burned out of his territory. You have deceived this pack for 19 years, Seraphina, Jaxon said, his voice echoing off the stone altar, carrying a chilling finality. You have brought the corrupt, defiled filth of witch magic into the sacred heart of the Bloodmoon lineage. You are a disease, a heretic. Jaxon, please, I choked out, my voice trembling as a single tear slipped down my cheek. I didn't choose this. I've hidden it. I've never harmed anyone. Silence, monster! Cora shouted from the front row, her face twisted in a triumphant sneer. You dare speak his name? You are a curse upon our goddess. Jaxon raised his hand, cutting her off. But his eyes never left mine. He drew himself up to his full, towering height, inhaling the crisp night air, before delivering the words that would shatter my world into a million pieces. I, Alpha Jaxon of the Bloodmoon Pack, reject you, Seraphina, as my mate and my Luna, he roared, the supernatural frequency of his words vibrating through the very marrow of my bones. You are an abomination to the moon goddess. I strip you of your pack bond. I strip you of your rank. I banish you from these lands, and if your shadow ever crosses our borders again, my wolves will hunt you down like the beast you are. Crack. The rejection hit me like a physical hammer to the chest. The invisible, golden thread that had just locked our souls together snapped violently. A scream of pure, unadulterated agony ripped from my throat as I dropped to my knees, clutching my chest. It felt as though someone had reached into my torso, grabbed my soul and torn it rawly in half. The agonizing pain of a severed mate bond was enough to drive normal wolves insane, but for me, it was twice as lethal. The rejection tore down the last remaining spiritual dam in my body. My inner wolf howled in agony, while the witch magic inside my blood roared in protest. The violet veins in my arms flared blindingly bright, and a shockwave of dark, kinetic energy exploded outward from my body. The stone floor beneath my knees cracked, and a gale-force wind whipped through the clearing, blowing out the massive bonfire on the altar. The pack screamed, drawing back in terror. She's attacking! Kill the heretic! A warrior shouted. Run! A voice inside my head whispered. It wasn't my voice. It was old, deep, and fiercely maternal. Run, Seraphina! Now! I didn't hesitate. Driven by pure survival instinct, I scrambled to my feet, turned around, and bolted into the dark, dense forest. Behind me, Jaxon's commanding roar echoed through the trees. Catch her! Do not let the monster escape our borders alive! The hunt was on. I ran faster than I ever had in my life. The cool night air tore at my lungs, and branches whipped across my face, cutting my skin, but I couldn't feel the pain. My mind was consumed by the suffocating weight of the broken bond. Every beat of my heart felt like glass scraping against my ribs. Behind me, the terrifying sounds of the pack filled the night, the heavy, rhythmic thuds of massive paws hitting the earth. the savage snarls of beta warriors shifting into their giant wolf forms. They weren't just escorting me to the border, they were hunting me for sport. "There she is!" A voice echoed to my left. I glanced back and saw 3 massive, grey wolves crashing through the underbrush, their eyes glowing a predatory yellow. They were gaining on me. As an Omega, my physical wolf speed was nothing compared to elite warriors. "Left!" the voice inside my head commanded. I took a sharp left, plunging down a steep, rocky ravine. The grey wolves lunged, their jaws snapping closed, just inches from the hem of my dress. I stumbled, tumbling down the dirt incline, rocks tearing at my hands and knees until I crashed violently against the base of a massive pine tree. I groaned, pushing myself up. Ahead of me, the trees abruptly stopped. I had reached the edge. I stepped out onto the precipice of the whispering crags. Below me was a sheer, dizzying drop into a vast canyon filled with a thick, churning ocean of grey mist. The neutral territories. A lawless, cursed wasteland where rogues, outcasts, and things far worse were said to live. No pack wolf ever dared to cross into the mist. I spun around, my back to the cliff. Out from the shadows of the tree line stepped the 3 grey warriors, their lips pulled back over razor-sharp fangs, dripping with saliva. Slowing down behind them was Cora, accompanied by a small group of pack members, all watching me with cold satisfaction. "End of the line, heretic," Cora laughed, stepping forward. "There is no place in this world for a freak like you. Jump, or let the warriors tear you apart. Either way, the Bloodmoon Pack is clean." The 3 wolves crouched low, preparing to spring forward and rip my throat out. I looked at the savage wolves. I looked at the vicious, smiling faces of the pack I had served faithfully for 19 years. Then, I looked down at the swirling, unknown mist beneath the cliff. If I stayed, I died a slave. If I jumped, I died on my own terms. "You think I'm a monster?" I whispered, my voice suddenly dropping into a low, echoing tone that made the warriors hesitate. I raised my chin, my eyes flashing a dangerous, defiant violet. "One day, I will make you realize what a real monster looks like." Before anyone could move, I stepped backward into the open air. The wind screamed in my ears as gravity grabbed me, pulling me down, 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 into the swallowing darkness of the misty abyss. Chapter 3. The shadow of the crags falling felt like being torn apart by 1,000 invisible hands. The wind ripped through my hair, stealing the scream right out of my throat as the jagged rock walls of the whispering crags blurred past in a sickening streak of grey and black. Below me, the thick, churning ocean of mist raced upward to swallow me whole. I waited for the impact. I waited for the dark, final snap of my bones against the stone canyon floor. Instead, I crashed into a dense canopy of ancient, weeping trees stretching out from the cliffside. Branches snapped violently under my weight, tearing through the fabric of my dress and slicing into my flesh, slowing my descent just enough before I hit the ground. Thud. The air exploded from my lungs as I slammed into the damp, mossy earth. For a long time, there was only darkness. When my eyes finally fluttered open, the world was a blur of muted greys and deep, suffocating shadows. I groaned, a wave of agony washing over me so intense it made my vision black out at the edges. My body was a roadmap of cuts and deep bruises, but miraculously, nothing felt broken. The magic rooted deep within my blood must have braced my body at the final second, shielding my vital organs from the worst of the fall. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the rotting vacuum inside my chest. The severed mate bond pulsed like an open, infected wound. Every time I inhaled, it felt like swallowing broken glass. Jaxon's brutal rejection was a heavy, dark poison, slowly draining the life force right out of me. Without a pack and without a mate, a rejected wolf's spirit simply withered away until they died of a broken heart. I rolled onto my side, coughing up a small trace of blood, and looked around. The air down here was heavy, cold, and smelled of damp earth and old copper. The thick mist rolled over the ground like a living thing, coiling around the trunks of massive, gnarled trees that looked like frozen skeletons. There was no birdsong, no sound of the wind. The silence of the neutral territories was absolute, heavy, and terrifying. I dragged myself toward the base of a massive, hollowed-out tree, propping my back against the damp bark. My breath came in short, ragged gasps. The violet veins in my arms were barely visible now, pulsing in weak, erratic patterns. "I'm dying," I realized, a numb acceptance washing over me. He rejected me. And now I'm going to die alone in the dirt. Suddenly the hair on the back of my neck stood up, the absolute silence of the forest snapped. From the deep mist ahead, the distinct, slow crunch of a heavy boot, pressing into dead leaves, echoed through the clearing. Crunch! Crunch! My heart hammered against my bruised ribs. I tried to push myself up, tried to summon even a single spark of my magic to protect myself, but my body refused to move. I was completely defenseless. Out from the swirling grey fog, a massive shadow emerged. He didn't look like a normal wolf. He was towering, easily half a foot taller than Alpha Jaxon, with a broad, imposing frame hidden beneath a long, tattered dark duster coat. A heavy, silver-hilted blade was strapped to his back. As he stepped closer into the dim light, the mist seemed to part around him, as if even the forest itself was afraid to touch him. He pulled back the hood of his coat, revealing a face that looked like it had been sculpted out of granite. He was strikingly handsome, but with a dark, dangerous edge. A jagged silver scar ran down from his left temple, cutting across his sharp jawline. His hair was as black as a raven's wing, and his eyes, my breath caught. His eyes weren't yellow, or blue or brown. They were a piercing, lethal shade of storm cloud grey. A rogue. And not just any rogue. The sheer, suffocating pressure of his presence hit me like a physical wave. He carried the aura of a commander, an apex predator who answered to no law but his own. The man stopped 5 feet away from me. He folded his arms, tilting his head slightly as his storm grey eyes swept over my broken, bloodied form. He didn't look amused, and he didn't look angry. He looked entirely indifferent. "Well," he said, his voice a deep, gravelly baritone that vibrated straight through the floor of the forest. "Look what the cliff spit out." I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing myself. "Just kill me," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Get it over with." A low, humorless chuckle vibrated in his chest. "If I wanted you dead, little wolf, I wouldn't waste a blade. The severed bond inside you is already doing the job perfectly." My eyes snapped open. He could smell it. He knew. He took a slow step closer, crouching down on one knee in front of me. The scent of him washed over me instantly. Rain, cedar, and something intensely metallic, like ozone before a massive thunderstorm. It was a dominant, wild scent that made my inner wolf whimper in submission. But my witch blood sparked, reacting to the sheer raw power rolling off him. He leaned in, his silver scar catching the dim light as he inhaled sharply, catching my scent. Suddenly he froze. The indifferent look vanished from his face, replaced by a sudden, intense sharpness. His grey eyes dilated, turning almost completely black as his gaze dropped down to my wrists, where the faint, weak violet light was still flickering beneath my skin. He reached out, his large, calloused hand gripping my wrist with surprising gentleness. The moment his skin touched mine, a strange, electric warmth surged up my arm, temporarily pushing back the freezing agony of the broken bond. "You aren't a pack wolf," he murmured, his voice dropping into a dangerous, dark whisper. He looked up, locking his storm grey eyes directly onto my violet ones. "And you sure as hell aren't just an omega." I tried to pull my hand back, but his grip was iron. "Let me go." "I know that mixed scent," the man said, a slow, dark smile spreading across his sharp features. It wasn't a smile of kindness. It was the smile of a hunter who had just found a legendary prize. Wolf blood, tangled with the forbidden arcane. A heretic anomaly. He stood up, effortlessly lifting my broken body into his massive arms as if I weighed nothing at all. I groaned, my head lolling against his broad chest, too weak to fight back. Who are you?" I choked out, my consciousness rapidly slipping away. "My name is Malakai," he whispered down to me, his voice the last thing I heard before the darkness took me completely. "And you, little monster, are exactly what I've been waiting for." Chapter 4. The unlocking. Waking up this time didn't hurt. The suffocating, icy rot that had been chewing at my chest for 19 years was gone, replaced by a strange, throbbing heat that pulsed deeply within my veins. I opened my eyes and found myself staring at a vaulted ceiling made of massive, dark stone blocks. Heavy wooden rafters spanned overhead, and the faint amber glow of a roaring hearth danced across the walls, casting long, twisting shadows. I wasn't in the dirt. I was lying on a massive bed, draped in thick, plush furs that smelled faintly of pine and wood smoke. I sat up abruptly, gasping as I looked down at myself. The ruined, bloody linen dress I had worn during my flight from the pack was gone. In its place, Someone had dressed me in a soft, clean black tunic and trousers made of a fine, heavy material. The cuts on my hands and arms were completely healed, leaving behind smooth, unblemished skin. Even more shocking was the energy humming inside me. The broken mate bond was still there, a dull, quiet ache in the background, but it was no longer killing me. The invisible dam holding my witch magic back hadn't just broken, it had been completely obliterated. The arcane power was rushing through my body like a wild, untamed river, hot and liberating. I wouldn't try to move too fast if I were you, a deep, gravelly voice warned from the shadows. I snapped my head toward the corner of the room. Malakai was sitting in a heavy, high-backed leather chair, his long legs stretched out toward the hearth. He had discarded his heavy duster coat, wearing only a dark, form-fitting shirt that emphasized the massive, powerful build of his shoulders and chest. He was holding a dagger, lazily turning the silver blade over his knuckles, the metal catching the amber firelight. Where am I?" I asked, my voice steady, sounding stronger and deeper than it ever had before. "My stronghold," Malakai replied, standing up and stepping into the light of the fire, his storm-grey eyes locked onto mine, sharp, piercing, and intensely observant. "Deep within the whispering crags. A place where your former Alpha's tracking dogs wouldn't dare poke their noses unless they want to be fed to the crows." "How am I alive?" I demanded, pulling the furs closer to my chest, my inner wolf pacing restlessly at his proximity. "The rejection. It should have withered my wolf. I should be dead." Malakai walked to the edge of the bed, setting the dagger down on a small side table with a soft clink. He leaned against the stone pillar of the bedpost, folding his arms across his broad chest. "Normally, yes," he said, a dark, dangerous gleam in his eyes. "When a normal wolf is rejected, their spirit breaks, because they rely entirely on the pack bond for survival. They are weak without the collective mind. But you aren't just a wolf, Seraphina. The moment Alpha Jaxon severed his tie to you, he unknowingly tore down the spiritual cage that was keeping your other half suppressed." He stepped closer, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a small, dried violet flower. "You've been poisoning yourself for years with silver leaf root to hide your magic," Malakai continued, dropping the flower onto the furs beside me. "The rejection didn't kill you, it unlocked you. Your witch blood woke up to save your life, fusing with your inner wolf to heal your body from the inside out." I looked down at my hands. I flexed my fingers, and instantly, a vibrant, crackling aura of neon-violet magic rippled across my knuckles. It didn't sting anymore. It didn't burn. It felt natural. It felt like a part of me that had been locked away in a dark room for far too long. "Why did you save me?" I asked, looking up to meet his intense, unyielding gaze. "In the packs, hybrids are hunted. We are viewed as a curse, an abomination. Why bring a monster into your home?" Malakai let out a low, dangerous chuckle that resonated deeply in his chest. He leaned down, bringing his face close to mine. The sharp, intoxicating scent of rain, cedar and ozone enveloped me again, making my heart skip a beat and my wolf thrum against my ribs. "I don't care about pack laws, little wolf. And I certainly don't care about purity," he whispered, his storm-grey eyes flashing a brilliant, dominant, predatory silver that made the room feel suddenly very small. "Pack alphas are weak. They rely on rules and numbers to feel powerful. Out here in the neutral territories, we value raw, unadulterated strength. And what you have inside you? It's a weapon unlike anything this world has seen in generations." He stood back up to his full, towering height, looking down at me with cold calculation. "Alpha Jaxon didn't just reject a mate tonight," Malakai said, a slow, ruthless smile spreading across his sharp features, highlighting the silver scar on his jaw. "He threw away an apex predator. And he has no idea that a storm is coming for his pack." Malakai turned toward the heavy wooden door of the chamber, pausing with his hand on the iron handle. He looked back over his shoulder, his gaze lingering on my glowing hands. "Rest up, Seraphina. Tomorrow, your training begins. You are going to learn how to weaponize that magic, and you are going to learn how to hunt. Because out here, you either become the predator, or you stay the prey." The door clicked shut behind him, leaving me alone in the flickering firelight. I looked down at my hands again, watching the beautiful, lethal violet light dance across my skin. For 19 years I had been a terrified Omega servant, hiding in the shadows, waiting to be destroyed by the people who were supposed to be my family. But as I felt the raw, terrifying power humming in my blood, a dark, cold realization washed over me. Alpha Jaxon thought he had banished a monster to die in the dark, but he had actually just set me free. Chapter 5. Trial by Magic and Teeth. The obsidian floors of the Stronghold's training hall were cold enough to numb the soles of my bare feet, but the blood rushing through my veins was pure fire. Again, Malakai commanded. His voice didn't just carry across the cavernous room, it vibrated inside my chest, a low, dominant rumble that demanded absolute submission. He stood in the center of the hall, stripped of his heavy duster coat. In the flickering amber torchlight, the sharp contours of his back and shoulders were on full display, a map of silver battle scars and dark swirling rogue tattoos that seemed to shift with every breath he took. I wiped a mixture of sweat and silverleaf residue from my brow, my chest heaving beneath my dark tunic. For 3 days, Malakai hadn't just trained me. He had broken me down to my very marrow, forcing me to summon the magic I had spent a lifetime suffocating. I can't, I gasped out, my knees trembling. The wolf, it's fighting the arcane. Every time I call on the magic, my wolf tries to tear its way out to suppress it. They hate each other, Malakai. They are trying to kill each other inside me. They are fighting because you are treating them like 2 separate entities, Malakai said, his storm-grey eyes darkening as he walked toward me. His steps were silent, fluid and predatory, the terrifying grace of a true apex alpha. He stopped, just inches away, his towering frame completely blocking out the heat of the hearth. The intoxicating scent of rain and crushed cedar wrapped around me, making my inner wolf stir with a strange, frantic hunger that had nothing to do with the fated bond I had lost. He reached out, his large, calloused hand wrapping firmly around my jaw. He forced my chin up, making me look directly into the stormy depths of his eyes. You are not a wolf carrying a witch's curse, Seraphina, he murmured, his thumb brushing against the sensitive skin of my throat, sending a violent jolt of electricity straight down my spine. And you are not a witch hiding inside a wolf's pelt, you are both. Stop fighting yourself, let the bloodlines bleed together. It hurts, I whispered, my eyes stinging with sudden hot tears. The ghost of Jaxon's rejection still throbbed in the back of my mind, a cold, mocking echo telling me I was nothing but a broken freak. Jaxon said I was an abomination. At the mention of the Bloodmoon Alpha, Malakai's grip tightened just a fraction, a lethal, possessive growl vibrating deep within his chest. Jaxon is a fool, blinded by the fragile rules of a dying pack. He wanted a submissive little breeding wolf to fetch his slippers and carry his legacy. He saw a fraction of your light and ran because he knew it would consume him. Malakai lowered his hand, his gaze dropping to my lips before locking back onto mine. Show me what you are, Seraphina. Hit me with everything you have. If you don't, the pack dogs will find you, and they will tear you apart. He stepped back, dropping into a loose, lethal combat stance. Come on. A spark of raw, unadulterated fury ignited in the pit of my stomach. The humiliation of the altar, the sneer on Cora's face, the phantom pain of the shattered bond. It all rushed to the surface, fueling the fire in my blood. I closed my eyes and stopped fighting the divide. I opened the floodgates. I called on my wolf's feral, savage speed, and at the exact same instant, I reached deep into the earth, pulling on the dark, shadow-weaving magic of my witch ancestry. When my eyes snapped open, the world shifted into a terrifying, vibrant violet hue. A feral snarl ripped from my throat, a sound that was half wolf, half demon. I lunged forward, moving so fast my body blurred into the shadows. I swept my hand outward, and 3 massive spikes of solid obsidian shadow erupted from the stone floor, hurtling toward Malakai's chest. Malakai's eyes widened in genuine surprise. He spun on his heel, his rogue reflexes the only thing saving him, as the shadow spike shattered against the wall behind him, spraying black stone dust into the air. But I wasn't done. The adrenaline was a drug, and the fusion of my bloodlines was finally complete. The magic didn't just coat my skin, it took over the shift. An agonizing, beautiful heat tore through my skeletal structure. My bones cracked and elongated, but I didn't grow the sleek, gray fur of a Bloodmoon Omega. Instead, thick, midnight black fur erupted across my skin, pulsing with veins of literal, glowing violet light. My hands elongated into terrifying claws, tipped with arcane energy, and my jaw extended as rows of razor-sharp, obsidian-fanged teeth filled my mouth. I dropped onto all fours, a massive, predatory beast. I was easily the size of a beta warrior but shrouded in a living cloak of shadows and crackling violet lightning. I was a heretic wolf, I threw my head back and let out a howl. It wasn't a normal wolf's cry, it was a dual-toned, haunting melody that shook the very foundations of the stone stronghold, a sound of pure, unbridled sovereignty that echoed out into the misty canyons of the crags. I locked my glowing violet eyes onto Malakai, crouching low, ready to tear him to pieces. But Malakai didn't draw his silver blade. He didn't drop into a defensive stance. He stood completely still, staring at my terrifying, monstrous form with an expression of absolute, breathless awe. The silver scar on his face caught the violet light radiating from my fur. Slowly, a dark, triumphant grin spread across his face, his own eyes flashing a brilliant, submission-inducing silver. "Look at you," Malakai whispered, his voice thick with a dark, dangerous reverie. He didn't look at me like I was a monster, he looked at me like I was a goddess. The Heretic Queen has finally arrived. Chapter 6. The Rogue Market. The transition back into my human skin was a slow, intoxicating ache. As the thick midnight black fur receded and the glowing violet veins settled beneath my flesh, I gasped for air, collapsing onto the cold stone floor. I was shivering, entirely exposed, but for the first time in my 19 years I didn't feel weak. The feral humming in my blood told me my inner wolf and my forbidden magic had finally stopped tearing each other apart. They had fused. A heavy, warm weight dropped over my trembling shoulders. I looked up to find Malakai hovering over me, having wrapped his long, fleece-lined duster coat around my shoulders. The intense scent of cedar and incoming rain on the fabric immediately anchored me, hushing the remaining static electricity crackling at my fingertips. His storm-gray eyes were still dark with that unyielding, breathless awe. "Get dressed," Malakai murmured, his low baritone brushing against my senses like velvet. "Your training here is done for the week. Today you learn what the rest of the world looks like when you aren't hiding in an alpha's basement." "Where are we going?" I asked, pulling his massive coat tightly around myself, my core tingling at the lingering heat of his touch. "The Low City," he said, turning toward the iron-reinforced doors of the hall. "The lawless heart of the neutral territories. You need ingredients to anchor that magic, Seraphina, and you need to see exactly what kind of power you're playing with." 2 hours later, we stepped through a hidden fissure in the jagged rock walls of the Whispering Crags. I expected a barren wasteland of desperate exiles. Instead, my breath caught. Sprawled out inside a massive subterranean cavern was a thriving, chaotic metropolis, lit by thousands of floating, enchanted violet lanterns. The air was a thick, dizzying cocktail of roasted meats, expensive tobacco, performance potions, and raw, unchecked supernatural aura. There were no submissive packbows here. Rogue wolves with jagged scars and heavy blades walked shoulder to shoulder with low-tier vampires draped in dark silk, while rogue witches sold hex talismans from velvet-lined stalls. It was beautiful, dangerous, and completely alive. Malakai walked through the crowd like a moving fortress, his massive shoulders cutting a wide, respectful path through the sea of outcasts. No one dared to look him in the eye. His reputation as the legendary shadow commander of the Crags was an invisible shield around us. I hurried to keep up, my fingers brushing against the rough stone stalls as we entered the deep underbelly of the marketplace, the arcane bazaar. "Stay close," Malakai warned, his hand dropping to the small of my back. The possessive heat of his palm through my tunic sent a shiver straight down my spine, making my inner wolf thrum in dark satisfaction. The vultures down here can smell an untouched bloodline from a mile away. We stopped in front of an ancient, open-air stall, draped in heavy, dark velvet. Sitting behind a counter filled with crystalline jars was a witch, with milk-white eyes and silver tattoos tracing her jaw. The old witch didn't look at Malakai. Instead, her blind eyes snapped directly to me. She tilted her head, inhaling deeply, and a look of profound, terrified realization washed over her weathered face. "The bloodlines, they're bleeding," the witch whispered, her voice like grinding stones. "The anomaly is awake." "Just the nightshade root and lunar salt, Cora," Malakai cut in, his voice dropping into a lethal warning growl that vibrated through the floorboards. The witch trembled, quickly reaching beneath the counter to pull out a small leather pouch filled with rare, shimmering ingredients. But as she handed them to me, her cold, bony fingers brushed against my wrist. A jolt of prophetic energy flashed through my mind, showing me a sudden, terrifying image of a burning forest and a pair of cruel, golden-yellow alpha eyes. "He searches for you, little queen," the witch hissed softly, her gaze locked onto mine. "The rejector's lands are rotting from the broken bond, and his desperation is a hungry beast. He has sent his hounds into the mist." My blood ran cold. Jaxon. I pulled my hand back, clutching the pouch to my chest. Malakai threw a handful of silver coins onto the counter, his storm grey eyes flashing a dangerous, blinding silver as he grabbed my arm and pulled me away from the stall. "We're leaving," he muttered, his posture rigid, his hand instinctively resting on the silver hilt of the blade strapped to his back. We moved quickly through the crowded, lantern-lit alleys, heading toward the eastern exit of the cavern. But as we passed a public bounty board pinned to a crumbling stone archway, my feet froze in the dirt. Pinned to the center of the wood was a crisp parchment, bearing a detailed, painted likeness of my face. Beneath it, written in bold, aggressive ink, were the words, "WANTED alive, eradication order." And stamped at the bottom of the parchment, in deep, blood-red wax, was the unmistakable royal crest of Alpha Jaxon and the Bloodmoon Pack. He wasn't just enforcing my banishment. He was hunting me down to erase the evidence of his curse, before the high supernatural councils discovered he had mated with a heretic. "He thinks you're still a defenseless Omega running through the woods," Malakai's deep voice echoed in my ear, his chest pressing against my back as he leaned in to look at the poster. His breath was hot against my neck, a dark, lethal promise curling in his tone. He has no idea he's just giving us a trail to follow. A cold, vicious calm washed over me, burning away the last of my childhood fear. I reached up, my claws extending just a fraction as I tore the parchment off the wooden board, letting a spark of neon-violet magic ignite at my fingertips. The poster turned to ash before it even hit the ground. "Let his hounds come," I whispered, turning to face Malakai, my violet eyes flashing in the darkness of the alley. "I want him to know exactly what's hunting him back." Chapter 7. The First Blood. The misty canopy of the Whispering Crags was so dense it choked out the moonlight, leaving the forest floor in a state of perpetual, suffocating twilight. We had been tracking them for an hour. Or rather, we were letting them track us. Malakai moved through the dense underbrush like a ghost, his massive frame completely silent despite the heavy combat boots he wore. I walked a few paces ahead of him, deliberately leaving a sloppy trail, a broken twig here, a deep footprint in the damp moss there. The leather pouch of nightshade and lunar salt swung against my hip, a comforting weight that fueled the electric hum in my veins. "They're close," Malakai whispered, his voice a low, gravelly vibration that barely carried past my ears. He didn't turn around, but I felt the heavy, possessive sweep of his storm-grey gaze over my back. A 5-wolf tracking unit. Elite beta warriors from the Bloodmoon crest. Jaxon didn't send scouts, he sent executioners. "Good," I murmured, a cold, vicious thrill shooting through my chest. My inner wolf stretched inside my mind, her claws digging into my consciousness, begging to be let loose. "I'm tired of running. Remember your training," Malakai cautioned, stepping into the deeper shadow of an ancient, hollowed-out pine. His silver scar gleamed faintly in the dark. "Do not fight them like a wolf. Do not fight them like a witch. Let them see the heretic before they die." I nodded, stepping out into a small, misty clearing where the grey fog pooled like water around my ankles. I stopped in the center, closing my eyes and inhaling the crisp, damp air. Through the scent of pine and ozone it hit me, a familiar, suffocating stench, the bitter, arrogant scent of the Bloodmoon Pack. "Step away from the trees, heretic." A harsh, mocking voice boomed from the shadows ahead. I opened my eyes. Out from the mist stepped 5 towering men, all draped in the heavy, dark leather coats of Alpha Jaxon's elite guard. At the center was Commander Garrett, a brutal, scar-faced beater who had personally overseen the humiliation of the Omegas for a decade. He looked at me, a cruel, triumphant smirk pulling at his lips as his eyes flashed a predatory warrior yellow. "Well, look at that," Garrett sneered, pulling a heavy silver dagger from his belt. "The little wolfless freak actually survived the fall. Alpha Jaxon wants your head on a spike by dawn, Seraphina. He wants the curse wiped clean." The other 4 warriors laughed, moving in a practiced, fluid semicircle to cut off my escape routes. They didn't even bared their fangs yet. To them, I was still the fragile, submissive servant who used to scrub the blood from their hunting boots. "Jaxon sent his best lapdogs," I said, my voice dropping into a smooth, dangerously calm tone that made Garrett's smirk falter for a fraction of a second. I stood my ground, letting my arms hang loosely at my sides. Tell me, Garrett, is the Alpha still sweating? Is his territory still rotting from the broken bond? Garrett's eyes darkened with raw fury. Shut your mouth, abomination. Shift and die, or die in your skin. It makes no difference to us. With a synchronized, ferocious roar, the 4 warriors behind him shifted. The sickening sound of snapping bones and tearing cloth filled the clearing as 4 massive iron-gray wolves emerged, their jaws snapping as they lunged toward me simultaneously. They expected me to scream. They expected me to cower. Instead, I smiled. I closed my eyes for a single heartbeat, opening the floodgates of my soul, letting my wolf's feral speed fuse with the dark, shadow-weaving magic of my witchblood. When my eyes snapped open, the clearing exploded into a vibrant, blinding neon-violet hue. What the? Garrett gasped, stumbling backward. I didn't shift into my wolf form yet. I didn't need to. I leaped forward, my movements blurring into a slipstream of pure shadow. The first grey wolf lunged for my throat, but I simply vanished from his trajectory, reappearing directly beneath his massive chest. I slammed my palm upward against his ribcage. A massive concussive blast of violet kinetic energy exploded from my hand, the sheer force of the magic shattering the beast's ribs and throwing his 500-pound frame effortlessly across the clearing, where he crashed into a boulder with a sickening crunch. He didn't get back up. The remaining 3 wolves froze, their ears pinning back as their predatory yellow eyes filled with an emotion they had never felt before, absolute terror. My turn, I whispered. An agonizing, beautiful heat tore through my skin as I let the magic take over the shift. My bones cracked, elongating into the massive, midnight black frame of the Heretic Wolf. Thick, dark fur pulsed with veins of literal, glowing violet lightning. My claws extended, tipped with raw, arcane energy, and I let out that jewel-toned, haunting howl that shook the pine needles from the trees. I lunged. It wasn't a fight, it was an execution. I tore through the remaining 3 warriors in a blur of claws, teeth, and shadow spikes. They tried to bite, tried to claw, but their physical alpha purity weapons meant nothing against a beast that could phase through shadows and strike with elemental wrath. Within minutes, the clearing fell completely silent again, save for the wet, heavy sound of my panting. 4 elite Bloodmoon warriors lay dead in the dirt, their life force completely snuffed out. I shifted back into my human skin, my chest heaving, the neon-violet light slowly receding into my veins. I turned my head toward the edge of the clearing, where Commander Garrett was currently dropped to his knees, clutching his silver dagger in a shaking hand, his face as pale as the mist. I walked toward him, my bare feet completely silent against the blood-soaked moss. From the shadows of the pine trees, Malakai stepped out. He didn't say a word, but his storm-gray eyes were burning with a dark, terrifying heat as he watched me corner my prey. I stopped a foot away from Garrett, looking down at the man who used to strike me for sport. I leaned down, my eyes flashing a dangerous violet as I gripped the front of his leather coat, pulling him up, until his terrified face was inches from mine. I'm going to let you live, Garrett, I whispered, my voice dripping with a chilling, queen-like sovereignty. You are going to run back to Alpha Jaxon. You are going to tell him that his hounds are dead. And you are going to tell him that the monster he cast away is coming back to take his crown. I shoved him backward into the dirt. Garrett didn't hesitate. He scrambled to his feet, turned around, and fled into the dark forest like a whipped dog. Malakai walked up behind me, his towering frame pressing against my back, his large, warm hands settling heavily on my waist. His breath was hot against my ear, a dark, deep rumble of pure, possessive pride. Beautiful, Malakai murmured, his lips brushing the sensitive skin of my neck, making my wolf thrum in absolute ecstasy. The Bloodmoon Pack has no idea the slaughter they've invited. Chapter 8. The Shadow Pact. The scent of Bloodmoon copper lingered on my skin long after Commander Garrett's frantic footsteps died out in the dark. I stood in the center of the clearing, my hands still trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the intoxicating, raw rush of the hybrid magic settling into my bones. You did well, little wolf. Malakai's voice drifted over my shoulder, low and laced with a dangerous warmth. Before I could turn, his massive form closed the distance between us, his chest pressed against my back, a solid wall of heat that shielded me from the biting chill of the canyon wind. He reached down, his large, calloused hands tracing a slow path up my forearms, his fingers brushing over the pale skin where the neon-violet veins had just receded. Wherever he touched, a violent, delicious spark flared beneath my skin, hushing the erratic, static electricity still crackling at my fingertips. They were his best tracker unit, I whispered, my voice sounding breathy, my head tilting back instinctively against his broad shoulder. Jaxon will be blind with rage when Garrett returns alone. Let him rage, Malakai murmured. He leaned down, his sharp jawline brushing the sensitive curve of my neck. The rich, dominant scent of rain, cedar and ozone enveloped me, making my inner wolf purr with a fierce, terrifying possessiveness. An angry alpha is a sloppy alpha. He will pour his warriors into the borderlands, leaving the heart of his territory completely unguarded. He spun me around with agonizing slowness, forcing me to look up into the stormy depths of his gray eyes. In the dim moonlight filtering through the canopy, the silver scar tracing his jaw made him look entirely lethal and breathtakingly handsome. But you aren't ready to march into his pack house just yet, Malakai continued, his thumb coming up to trace my bottom lip, his gaze dropping to watch the movement before locking back onto mine. Your wolf and your arcane blood have accepted each other, but you still lack an anchor. If you push that hybrid form too far without a tether to this world, the magic will burn your wolf alive from the inside out. A cold dread pricked at the back of my neck. An anchor? How do I find one? Malakai's slow, ruthless smile spread across his sharp features. You don't find it, Seraphina, you choose it. A hybrid requires an anchor of equal or greater power to balance the scales. A blood pact. A tether bound by soul and shadow. My breath caught as the true weight of his words settled into my chest. He wasn't talking about a simple witch's talisman or an enchanted stone. He was talking about a mate bond, or something dangerously close to it. The golden shattered thread of Jaxon's rejection still throbbed like a phantom limb in the background of my mind, but looking at Malakai, a completely different, darker hunger clawed at my soul. Kai didn't answer with words. He reached to his hip, drawing a small, beautifully ornate obsidian dagger. The blade caught the silver moonlight as he raised it between us. Without breaking eye contact, he pressed the razor-sharp edge against the palm of his hand, slicing a clean line across his skin. Dark, thick crimson blood welled up instantly, pulsing with the immense suffocating aura of a rogue commander. I have spent 5 years waiting for a weapon capable of tearing the High Pack councils down to the bedrock, Malakai whispered, his storm-grey eyes dilating until they were almost completely black, flashing a dominant, silver alpha light. Bind your magic to my shadow, Seraphina. Let me be your anchor and I will give you an army of exiles to burn the Bloodmoon Pack to ash. The offer hung in the silent air, dripping with dark temptation. To accept was to bind myself to the most dangerous rogue in the neutral territories. To refuse was to risk tearing myself apart. My inner wolf didn't hesitate. She threw her head back inside my mind, howling in absolute feral agreement. She wanted him. She wanted his strength, his scent, his darkness. I reached out, taking the obsidian dagger from his grip. I pressed the cold blade into my own palm, drawing a matching line across my skin. The neon violet sparks in my blood flared, mixing with the crimson welling in my hand. I dropped the dagger into the moss. I raised my hand and pressed my bleeding palm directly against his. Boom! The moment our blood mingled, a violent blinding shockwave of energy exploded behind my eyelids. It wasn't the golden submissive warmth of the moon goddess's fated bond. This was something ancient, forbidden, and entirely carnal. A living cloak of pure shadow erupted from Malakai's body, swirling around us like a hurricane, while my neon violet lightning crackled through the dark smoke. I gasped, my knees buckling as the raw, unadulterated power of his rogue aura poured into my veins, wrapping around my volatile magic like an iron sheath. The agonizing ache of Jaxon's rejection was instantly crushed, buried beneath a mountain of dark, possessive sovereignty. Malakai caught me before I could fall, his arms locking around my waist, pulling my hips flush against his towering frame. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving against mine, his eyes burning with a savage, territorial hunger that sent a wave of liquid fire straight to my core. You are anchored now, little queen, Malakai growled softly, his face hovering mere inches from mine, his dominant silver gaze marking me as his own. Your power belongs to the shadows. And Jaxon has officially run out of time. Chapter 9. The Rotting Border. The blood pact hummed beneath my skin like a living, purring beast. Every time I breathed, I didn't just feel my own pulse. I felt a dark, echoing vibration that tied me straight back to Malakai. The constant freezing agony of the shattered fated bond had been completely silenced, buried deep under the suffocating weight of his shadow magic. I felt anchored. I felt heavy with a lethal, intoxicating stability. We move at dawn. Malakai had told me before sending me to my quarters, but I couldn't sleep. The neon-violet veins in my arms were quiet, subdued by the iron sheath of our pact, but my mind was a chaotic storm. I paced the floor of the stone chamber, the plush furs beneath my bare feet, doing nothing to soothe the phantom itch of the forest. By the time the first pale grey light of morning filtered through the high stone rafters, I was already waiting by the iron-reinforced doors. Malakai emerged from the shadows of the corridor, his heavy duster coat draped over his broad shoulders. He stopped when he saw me, his storm-grey eyes sweeping down my frame with a slow, intensely possessive intensity that made my inner wolf stretch and scratch at my ribs. He didn't say a word, but the sudden, sharp scent of rain and crushed cedar told me exactly how much my presence affected him. "The border is 3 miles north," he said, his gravelly baritone vibrating in the quiet hallway. "Garrett will have reached Jaxon by now. The Bloodmoon border patrols will be on high alert, but they won't expect us to cross into the Western Ridge." "The Western Ridge is steep rock," I said, a dark smile playing at the corners of my lips. "They think it's impossible for anyone who can't fly." "They don't know you can move through the shadows now," Malakai murmured, stepping closer until his chest was a fraction of an inch from mine, his dominant silver aura wrapping around me like a warm blanket. "Let's go." We left the stronghold through a subterranean tunnel that opened directly into the higher ridges of the whispering crags. The air up here was biting cold, the wind whipping through my dark hair as we navigated the narrow, treacherous stone paths that overlooked the borderlands. Below us, stretching out like a vast green carpet, were the ancestral forests of the Bloodmoon Pack. But as I looked closer, my breath caught. The forest didn't look the way it had 3 days ago. From this height, I could see massive, dark patches of grey and black spreading through the canopy like ink in water. The vibrant, magical life force of the territory was visibly dying. The leaves were rotting on the branches and a heavy, unnatural fog hung over the trees. The land was rejecting its alpha. "The broken bond," Malakai muttered, standing beside me at the edge of the precipice, his eyes locked onto the decaying forest. "An alpha's soul is tied directly to the health of his territory. When Jaxon rejected his fated Luna, when he chose to cast away his true match because of his fragile pride, he poisoned the bedrock of his own kingdom. The land is dying, Seraphina, and his pack will soon follow." A cold, ruthless satisfaction settled into my chest. He wanted purity, now he has rot. "Let's go give him a closer look," Malakai said. We descended the ridge, dropping silently into the thick, damp underbrush of the western border. The moment my bare feet touched the soil of my former home, a wave of bitter nostalgia washed over me. The air smelled different here, sour, stagnant, and heavy, with the desperate, territorial scent of hunting wolves. Suddenly, the bond inside our blood snapped tight. Malakai threw his arm out, catching me by the waist and pulling me back into the dense shadow of a massive, gnarled oak tree. "Don't move," he breathed into my ear, his body a solid, protective wall against my back. Through the rotting mist ahead, the heavy, frantic crunch of boots filled the quiet woods. 2 Bloodmoon warriors were sprinting down the border path, their faces pale, their eyes wide with panic. They weren't hunting, they were fleeing. "Did you see the Eastern River?" one of the warriors gasped out, stopping to lean against a tree trunk just 20 feet from where we were hidden. "The water turned to black sludge overnight. Half the Amigas are down with a fever, and the Alpha is unhinged. He executed 2 betters this morning, just for questioning his orders." "He's looking for the heretic," the second warrior whispered, shivering despite his thick leather coat. "Garrett came back raving about a monster with purple eyes that wiped out his entire unit. If we don't find her soon, the Alpha is going to tear this pack apart himself." I looked up at Malakai through the darkness of the shadows. His storm-grey eyes were locked onto mine, a dark, triumphant gleam burning in their depths. The storm hadn't even arrived yet, and Jaxon's kingdom was already tearing itself to pieces from the inside out. I leaned out from the shadow of the tree, my eyes flashing a brilliant, lethal neon violet as I let a single crackling spark of hybrid magic dance across my fingertips. "Looking for me?" I whispered into the mist. Chapter 10. The Harvest of Shadows. The 2 Bloodmoon warriors froze as my whisper rippled through the rotting fog. For a terrifying beat of silence, neither of them breathed. Then, their heads snapped toward the gnarled oak tree. Their eyes widened, reflecting the neon violet glow dancing across my fingertips like captive lightning. "The heretic," The first warrior choked out, his hand diving frantically toward the silver-hilted shortsword at his belt. He never got the blade out of its sheath. Before he could even draw a breath to sound the pack alarm, Malakai moved. He didn't just step out of the shadows, he seemed to command them. A localized wave of absolute darkness erupted from his towering frame, completely blinding the two men. In a fluid, lethal blur, Malakai closed the distance, his massive hand clamping around the first warrior's throat. With a sickening muted crack, the man went limp, dropping into the dead leaves like a stone. The second warrior stumbled backward, his yellow warrior eyes flashing in pure, unadulterated panic as the shadow cloak dissipated. He turned to bolt back toward the pack house, but I was already there. Fused with my wolf's predatory speed, my body blurred. I reappeared directly in his path. "Please," he gasped, his knees buckling as he stared into my glowing violet eyes. He looked at my face, recognizing the Omega who used to scrub his muddy boots. But the creature standing before him now was a queen of nightmares. "You ran from Jaxon because you fear his madness," I said, my voice dropping into that dual-toned, haunting frequency that made the very air vibrate. I extended my hand, my fingernails lengthening into sharp black claws pulsing with arcane energy. I hovered them just an inch from his throat. "But you should have stayed with him. He is a boy playing with matches. I am the fire." "Seraphina, wait." Malakai's deep baritone cut through the clearing. I didn't lower my hand, but I glanced back over my shoulder. Malakai walked toward me, his heavy combat boots silent against the damp earth, his storm-gray eyes burning with a dark, calculated intensity. He stopped beside me, his immense heat washing over my back, comforting my inner beast. "Leave him his tongue," Malakai murmured, his gaze dropping to the trembling wolf at my feet. "An army is built on fear, little queen. We need a messenger to carry the sight of your power into the lower ranks. If the Omegas and Betas know that Jaxon's curse is actually their executioner, they will lay down their arms before we even cross the inner gates." I looked back down at the warrior. The sheer terror radiating off his scent was intoxicating. My inner wolf clawed at my chest, wanting blood, wanting to erase every single piece of the pack that had discarded us. But the cold, strategic mind of my witch ancestry knew Malakai was right. I leaned down, my face inches from the warrior's. The scent of ozone and rain from my blood pact with Malakai filled the air, heavy and suffocating. "Go back to the pack house," I whispered, slicing a tiny shallow line across his cheek with the tip of my claw. A drop of blood welled up, immediately turning black as a trace of my shadow magic seared the wound. "Tell the elders that the land is rotting because their alpha is a hollow shell. Tell them that if they stand by Jaxon when the blood moon rises again, they will rot with him." I stepped back, releasing him. "Run!" The warrior didn't look back. He scrambled to his feet and sprinted into the foggy, decaying forest, sobbing as he fled. Malakai walked up behind me, his large, calloused hands settling heavily onto my waist. He pulled my back flush against his chest, his head lowering so his sharp jaw brushed against my ear. A low, possessive growl vibrated deep within his torso, sending a wave of delicious, liquid fire straight to my core. "You speak like a commander now," he murmured, his lips pressing a soft, burning kiss against the sensitive skin of my neck. "The frightened little girl who tumbled off the crags is entirely dead. She died the moment Jaxon broke the bond," I said, turning in his embrace to face him. I reached up, my hands resting on the broad, scarred contours of his chest. The blood pact hummed violently between us, a beautiful, terrifying anchor that kept my dual natures perfectly aligned. "What is the next step?" Malakai's storm-gray eyes darkened, a ruthless, triumphant grin spreading across his face. "We gather the exiles," he whispered, his hand coming up to cup the back of my head, his fingers tangling in my dark hair. "Tonight, at the midnight hour, the rogue factions of the Low City gather at the altar of the Outcasts. They want to see the weapon I've been hiding. They want to see the Heretic Queen before they swear their lives to her." He leaned down, his lips brushing mine in a brief, intensely possessive promise that left me breathless. "Let's go show them what a monster can do." Chapter 11. The Altar of the Outcasts. The Altar of the Outcasts did not sit under the open sky. It was buried deep within the lowest root system of the Whispering Crags, a massive amphitheater-like cavern, where the subterranean rock had been carved away by centuries of dark magic. The air down here was thick, with the scent of unwashed leather, spilled ale, performance potions, and the heavy metallic tang of raw, unchecked supernatural aura. Hundreds of rogue wolves, disgraced witches, and lawless exiles packed the stone ledges, their low murmurs sounding like the buzzing of a hornet's nest. They were the dregs of the supernatural world, the unchosen, the broken, and they were all waiting for us. Malakai led the way down the steep stone steps, his long duster coat sweeping behind him. The sheer, suffocating weight of his commander's aura cleared a path through the crowd instantly. He didn't look at them, his jaw was set, a mask of cold granite authority. But as I stepped into the torchlight behind him, a wave of hostile defensive growls rippled through the cavern. "A pack wolf?" a scarred rogue wolf sneered from the front row, his eyes flashing a volatile yellow as he bared his fangs. "You brought an Omega into the sacred grounds, Malakai? Has the Shadow Commander lost his mind? She smells like the Bloodmoon elite," a rogue witch hissed, her fingers twisting around a bone talisman. "A pretty little doll sent to spy on us." I stopped at the edge of the central stone platform. The whispers and sneers pressed against me, trying to force me back into the submissive, cowering girl I used to be. For 19 years, I had lowered my head. For 19 years, I had taken the insults. Beside me, Malakai did not move to defend me. He stood entirely still, his storm grey eyes locked onto mine, a silent, testing challenge burning in their depths. "Show them," his gaze demanded. "Command them." I closed my eyes and drew a deep breath. I reached past the phantom ache of my past, deep into the core of my blood pact with Malakai. I grabbed his heavy anchoring shadow magic and slammed it directly into the volatile, chaotic fire of my own arcane wolf. When my eyes snapped open, the torches in the cavern didn't just flicker, they turned a blinding neon violet. Boom. A massive, concussive wave of hybrid energy exploded outward from my body. The sheer kinetic force of the magic slammed into the front rows of the crowd, forcing the massive rogue warriors to stumble backward, their boots scraping against the stone. The sneers vanished. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy enough to suffocate. I stepped onto the center of the altar, my bare feet completely silent. I pulled back the sleeves of my black tunic, revealing the glowing neon violet grid of veins pulsing beneath my skin. Small, jagged arcs of purple lightning crackled across my knuckles, hissing in the quiet room. "Look at me," I commanded, my voice dropping into that dual-toned, haunting frequency that vibrated straight through the stone floorboards. "I am no spy, and I am damn sure no Packwolf's doll." I swept my gaze over the sea of stunned, pale faces. "My name is Seraphina," I continued, my voice carrying a chilling, queen-like sovereignty that made the oldest rogues bow their heads instinctively. "Alpha Jaxon of the Bloodmoon Pack called me an abomination. He tore our fated bond to pieces and threw me off the crags to die in the dirt because he was terrified of what I was. He wanted to keep his bloodline pure." I stepped closer to the edge of the platform, the violet light radiating from my skin casting long demonic shadows over the crowd. "But look what his purity brought him," I whispered, a cold, vicious smile pulling at my lips. "His borderlands are rotting, his rivers are turning to black sludge. His territory is dying because the land knows its Alpha is a coward. He thinks he banished a curse, but he actually just let loose his executioner." A low, rumbling murmur of realization began to spread through the exiles. They didn't see an Omega anymore. They saw a weapon. They saw a legend come to life. "Malakai promises you a war to tear the High Councils down to the bedrock," I said, turning my head to lock eyes with the Shadow Commander. He was staring at me, a dark, triumphant grin spreading across his face, his own eyes flashing a proud, submission-inducing silver. "And I promise you, the head of the Bloodmoon Alpha." From the back of the cavern, a massive rogue warrior threw his fist into the air. "The Heretic Queen!" The chant caught like wildfire. Within seconds, the entire cavern was shaking with the deafening roar of hundreds of exiles, their voices unified in a bloodthirsty, savage rhythm. "The Heretic Queen! The Heretic Queen!" Malakai walked up behind me, his towering frame casting a massive protective shadow over my body. He reached down, his large, warm hand wrapping firmly around mine, lifting our joined hands into the torchlight. The blood pact hummed violently between us, a beautiful, terrifying bond of soul and shadow. He leaned down, his breath hot against my ear, his voice a deep, gravelly purr of pure possessiveness. "They are yours now, Seraphina," Malakai whispered. "Your army is awake. Now, let's go hunt an Alpha." Chapter 12. The Council of Rogues. The deafening chants of the exiles still vibrated through the stone floorboards of the amphitheater, as Malakai led me into the strategy war room behind the altar. The chamber was small, lit only by a single iron-ringed chandelier, holding heavy tallow candles. In the center sat a massive table carved from a single slab of rough pine, its surface covered in hand-drawn parchment maps of the Whispering Crags and the surrounding Pact territories. Standing around the table were 4 individuals, the faction leaders of the Low City. They were the ones who truly held the strings of the rogue army, and none of them looked easy to please. "They scream for you out there, girl," a burly rogue wolf named Kalen muttered, his arms crossed over a chest covered in old silver burn scars. He didn't growl this time, but his yellow eyes were wary, tracing the faint violet static still dancing along my collarbone. "But screams don't win a pack war. Jaxon has 300 disciplined, blooded warriors. We have a rabble of exiles and thieves." "A rabble backed by a weapon he can't anticipate," Malakai said, stepping up to the table. His towering presence instantly dominated the small room. He slammed his palms down onto the wood, leaning over the maps. "Jaxon's forces are currently concentrated here, along the eastern and southern rivers, trying to contain the rot. He left the western pass guarded by a skeleton crew because he thinks the crags are impassable." It was impassable, a slender witch named Vanya countered, her fingers tracing a line of runes carved into her bone necklace. Her milky, blind eyes turned toward me, until she fused the arcane with the beast. She didn't just break her own cage, Malakai. She opened a tear in the spiritual ley lines of the entire mountain range. That's why the Bloodmoon lands are decaying so quickly. The territory's magic is bleeding out through her. I walked up to the edge of the table, looking down at the map of the village where I had spent 19 years as a servant. I pointed a black-clawed finger directly at the grand pack house at the center of the valley. "The pack house sits on a natural spring," I said, my voice smooth, cold, and entirely devoid of the fear that used to choke me in that house. "If the rot reaches the spring, the inner walls will collapse from the spiritual backlash within 48 hours. Jaxon knows this. He's running out of time, which means he's going to do something desperate." "Like what?" Kalen asked, tilting his head. "A blood sacrifice," I whispered, my violet eyes flashing in the candle glare. "The ancient pack laws state that if a territory is dying from a broken fated bond, the Alpha can offer the blood of his closest kin, or the one who broke the bond, back to the moon goddess to reset the lineage. He can't get to me, so he will use someone else." Malakai's jaw tightened, a dangerous, lethal aura rolling off his shoulders. He looked at me, his storm-grey eyes dark with calculation. "The Alpha's mother, or the youngest pack line. He'll put them on the altar at the next blood moon to save his own skin. We strike before then," I declared, my tone carrying a chilling, queen-like sovereignty that made even the burly Kalen step back a fraction. "We don't march the whole army through the front gates. Malakai and I will take a strike team through the western shadow paths. We draw Jaxon out, isolate him from his warriors, and let the pack see their god bleed." "And the rest of the army?" Vanya asked. "They wait at the border," Malakai cut in, his deep baritone laced with a ruthless pride as his gaze locked onto mine. He reached out, his large, calloused hands settling heavily on the small of my back, pulling me flush against his side. The contact sent a violent, delicious jolt of energy through our blood pact, anchoring my wild magic instantly. The moment Jaxon falls, the pack bond will shatter completely. The Bloodmoon warriors will be broken, directionless and ripe for submission. That is when the army moves in to claim the territory. The 4 faction leaders looked at each other. The doubt in their eyes was gone, replaced by a dark, hungry ambition. One by one, they bowed their heads to Malakai, and then, more deeply, to me. "We ready the blades," Kalen said, turning to leave the room. As the leaders filed out, leaving the 2 of us alone in the dim candlelight, Malakai turned me to face him. He didn't say a word, but his hands were possessive as they slid up my waist, his thumbs tracing the sharp lines of my hip bones beneath the black tunic. His breath was hot against my lips, smelling of rich cedar and ozone. "You handled them perfectly," he growled softly, his eyes flashing a brilliant, submission-inducing silver, "a true queen in the making." "I learned from the best," I whispered, reaching up to trace the jagged silver scar on his jaw. "Tonight, we rest," Malakai murmured, his head dipping lower until his lips brushed against my neck, biting gently at the soft skin, marking me as his own before the battle. "Tomorrow, we paint his valley purple." Chapter 13. The Whispering Pass. The western pass of the Whispering Crags was nothing more than a jagged scar in the mountain, a narrow ledge where a single misstep meant plunging thousands of feet into the churning grey fog below. The wind here was a living beast howling through the stone arches, screaming like the ghosts of the exiles who had died trying to cross it. But tonight, the shadows were on our side. I moved at the front of our strike team, my bare feet completely silent against the icy wet stone. Thanks to the blood pact humming beneath my skin, my vision had entirely shifted. I didn't see the darkness. I saw the world in high-contrast shades of charcoal and vibrant neon violet. Every jagged rock, every hidden crevice, lit up perfectly before me. Behind me, Malakai walked like a mountain of dark energy. The long tails of his leather duster coat whipped in the gale-force wind, but his steps were heavy, precise, and unyielding. Behind him came Kalen and 6 elite rogue warriors, their weapons muffled in dark cloth, their yellow eyes darting nervously around the treacherous path. They were terrified of the heights, but they were more terrified of losing sight of their queen. "We're crossing the threshold," Malakai's gravelly baritone echoed inside my mind. It wasn't a vocal sound. The blood pact allowed his thoughts to brush against mine, a heavy, comforting pressure against my consciousness. "The Bloodmoon border wards are directly ahead, Seraphina. They will smell our wolf blood the moment we cross." "They won't smell a thing," I thought back, a cold, vicious smile pulling at my lips. I stopped at the narrowest point of the pass, where 2 massive obsidian pillars formed a natural gateway into the Bloodmoon Valley. Carved into the stone were ancient runic symbols, glowing a faint, defensive gold. The Pact's spiritual alarm system. The moment a rogue or an enemy wolf stepped between those pillars, Jaxon's inner guard would know. I stepped forward, entirely unafraid. I raised both hands, my fingernails lengthening into black, arcane claws. I didn't call on my wolf's physical strength. Instead, I reached deep into the earth, pulling on the dark, shadow-weaving magic of my witch ancestry, filtered through the iron sheath of Malakai's anchor. "Drown," I whispered into the wind. Thick, midnight black smoke poured from my fingertips, coiling around the obsidian pillars like suffocating serpents. The purple lightning crackled across the stone, aggressively eating away at the golden runic magic. The ancient defensive wards didn't just shatter, they turned black, rotting from the inside out until the gold died completely, leaving the stone cold and dead. Kalen let out a low, breathless curse behind me. She just choked out a century-old Alpha ward like it was a candle. "Move," Malakai commanded, his hand settling on the small of my back to urge me forward. The possessive heat of his palm sent a violent jolt of adrenaline through my veins, making my inner wolf snarl in hunger. We slipped through the dead gate, descending the steep, rocky slope into the western valley of the Bloodmoon Pack. The air down here was sickening. The scent of pine and fresh earth had been completely replaced by the sour, stagnant stench of rot. The grass beneath my feet was black and slimy, turning to mush with every step. The trees looked like weeping skeletons, their bark peeling away in greasy layers. Jaxon's kingdom wasn't just dying, it was decomposing alive. "Look," one of the rogue warriors whispered, pointing through the dead branches ahead. A quarter-mile down the path sat the Western Watchtower, a 3-story stone outpost that usually housed a dozen elite beta sentries. But tonight, there were no guards patrolling the wooden catwalks. The iron lanterns were unlit. From the base of the tower, a low, agonized groaning drifted through the foggy air. I blurred forward, my shadow-stepping magic pulling me across the distance in the blink of an eye. Malakai was right beside me, his hand resting on the heavy silver hilt of the blade strapped to his back. We stepped into the watchtower courtyard, and my breath caught. 4 Bloodmoon sentries lay sprawled across the rotting moss. They weren't dead, not yet. But their skin was grey, their veins pulsing a sickly, toxic yellow. They were clawing at their own chests, their breathing ragged and wet. The spiritual backlash of the broken fated bond was tearing through the pack hierarchy, hitting the warriors who relied on Jaxon's alpha aura for strength. One of the sentries, a young beta who used to throw rocks at me when I carried the laundry, rolled his head over. His yellow eyes were cloudy, filled with a desperate, pathetic terror. He looked at my black tunic. He looked at my glowing violet eyes. "Seraphina," he wheezed, blood trickling from his split lips. The curse. Please, make it stop." I looked down at him, my face a mask of absolute, unyielding stone. The fragile, forgiving Omega he expected to see was entirely gone. "I didn't bring the rot, Leo," I whispered, my voice carrying that dual-toned, chilling sovereignty that echoed off the stone tower. "Your alpha did. He wanted a pure pack. Enjoy the harvest." I turned my back on him, looking up at Malakai. The Shadow Commander was watching me, his storm grey eyes dark with a savage territorial pride. He reached out, his large, calloused hand wrapping firmly around the back of my neck, pulling my face close to his. The inner village is completely unprotected, Malakai growled softly, his thumb tracing the sharp line of my jaw. Jaxon has pulled every remaining healthy warrior into the Grand Plaza. He's preparing the altar, Seraphina. He's going to sacrifice his own sister to reset the bloodline. A spark of raw, unadulterated fury ignited in the pit of my stomach, flaring the violet veins in my arms into brilliant life. Then let's go interrupt his ceremony, I whispered. Chapter 14. The Bloodmoon Sacrifice. The Grand Plaza of the Bloodmoon Pack was a theater of desperation. 19 years of my life had been spent scrubbing these very flagstones, but tonight, the stone was slick with a greasy, black film of decaying magic. The towering bonfire at the center of the plaza burned with a sickly green-tinged flame, casting long, frantic shadows across the faces of the remaining pack members. There were barely 100 wolves left standing. The elite warriors who once carried themselves with arrogant dominance were now hunched, their eyes bloodshot, their breathing shallow as the spiritual rot of the territory chewed at their inner beasts. At the center of the elevated stone altar, bound by thick silver chains that hissed against her skin, was Lyra, Jaxon's younger sister. She was only 16, a blameless amiga who had always looked away in quiet shame whenever the others mistreated me. Now, she was sobbing, her pale dress stained with the soot of the green fire. And standing over her, a heavy ceremonial broadsword held in his massive, trembling hands, was Alpha Jaxon. He looked unhinged. His regal leather coat was torn, his hair wild, and his dark eyes were bloodshot, flashing a manic, erratic golden yellow. The glorious alpha authority he once wore like armor had degenerated into the volatile panic of a cornered beast. "Great Mother!" Jaxon's voice boomed, cracked and desperate, echoing off the rotting walls of the pack house. "Accept the pure blood of my lineage. Wash away the heretic curse that has defiled our soil. Cleanse the Bloodmoon Pack." He raised the heavy broadsword high above his head, the green firelight glinting off the polished steel. Lyra squeezed her eyes shut, a terrified shriek ripping from her throat. "Jaxon, stop!" A voice shattered the night. It wasn't a scream. It was a dual-toned, chilling command that swept across the plaza like a physical gale-force wind, instantly snuffing out the green bonfire and plunging the clearing into absolute darkness. "What? Who goes there?" Jaxon roared, stumbling back from the altar as his warriors frantically bared their fangs, looking around the pitch-black plaza. Out from the shadows at the edge of the clearing, a single, brilliant spark of neon-violet magic ignited. I stepped into the dim moonlight, my bare feet silent against the slick stone. I pulled back the hood of my dark tunic, letting the entire pack see the face of the amiga they had banished to die in the dirt. My violet eyes burned like twin stars, and the neon-violet grid of veins tracing my arms lit up the darkness, casting a lethal, ethereal glow over my sharp features. "You are looking for the curse in all the wrong places, Jaxon," I said, my voice smooth, cold, and entirely commanding. A collective, horrified gasp rippled through the surviving pack members. "Seraphina," Cora whispered from the front row. She looked pathetic now, her beautiful red silk dress tattered, her skin a sickly gray as she clutched a warrior's arm for support. "The abomination. She's back." Jaxon gripped his broadsword tighter, his chest heaving as he stared down at me from the altar. The golden glow in his eyes flared with a potent mixture of manic rage and deep instinctive terror. You dare show your defiled face in my territory again? Warriors! Kill her! Tear her to pieces before she rots the rest of our air." Not a single warrior moved. They looked at my glowing veins, they felt the crushing, supernatural pressure rolling off my body, and they stayed frozen. They were leaderless, terrified and broken. "Your dogs are out of commission, Alpha," a deep, gravelly baritone boomed from the shadows behind me. Out from the darkness stepped Malakai. His towering 6'6" frame completely dominated the path, his storm grey eyes flashing a dominant, predatory silver as he folded his arms across his broad chest. The sheer weight of his commander's aura crashed over the plaza, forcing the weakest bedders to drop straight to their knees in instinctive submission. Behind him, Kaelin and the elite rogue warriors emerged, their blades drawn, their expressions ruthless. Jaxon looked at Malakai. He looked at the rogue army surrounding his plaza. Finally, his gaze locked back onto me, his face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. "You brought rogues to my gates, Seraphina? You bound yourself to the filth of the wasteland just to spite me?" Jaxon sneered, stepping down the stone altar steps, his heavy boots clicking against the flagstones. He raised his chin, trying to summon the remnants of his stolen dignity. "You are an Omega, a half-blooded freak. The moon goddess itself rejected you through my voice. You cannot defeat a true Alpha." I took a slow step forward, a cold, vicious smile pulling at my lips as my fingernails lengthened into sharp black arcane claws. "The moon goddess didn't reject me, Jaxon," I whispered, the hybrid magic inside my blood roaring to life, pulsing in perfect, anchored harmony with Malakai's shadow pact. "She just realized I was too big for your cage. Step down from that altar and face your executioner." Chapter 15. The execution of an Alpha. Jaxon let out a guttural primal roar that shook the tattered shingles of the pack house. The remaining golden glow of his Alpha ancestry flared one last desperate time as his physical body began to expand, his clothes tearing away as his bones snapped and rearranged into a massive, golden-furred werewolf. He was huge, easily twice the size of a standard warrior, but the golden fur was patchy, stained with the greasy black rot of the territory. He didn't look like a proud leader, he looked like a rabid, dying beast. He lunged from the altar steps, his massive jaws snapping open, aimed directly for my throat. "Stay back," I thought, through the blood pact, halting Malakai and Kaelin before they could interfere. "He's mine." I didn't shift into my wolfskin. Not yet. I wanted him to see the face of the woman he discarded as I broke him. Using my wolf's feral speed, I waited until his massive fangs were inches from my face before I stepped sideways, melting entirely into the slipstream of shadows. Jaxon crashed heavily into the stone flagstones where I had been standing, his claws scraping uselessly against the rock. "Over here, Alpha," I mocked, my voice echoing from the darkness behind him. He spun around, snapping blindly, but I was already moving. I raised both hands, my glowing violet veins flaring blindingly bright as I slammed my palms down into the earth. "Drown him," I commanded. Massive thorny vines of solid obsidian shadow erupted from the cracks in the flagstones, coiling around Jaxon's massive paws like iron cuffs. He howled in sudden, agonizing shock as the dark, forbidden magic of my witch ancestry seared his skin, eating away at the remaining purity of his wolf energy. He thrashed violently, tearing 2 of the vines apart, but 3 more rose to take their place, pinning his massive golden frame flat against the blood-slick stone. The surviving pack members watched in absolute horrified silence. Their god, their infallible Alpha, was pinned in the dirt by an Omega servant. "Seraphina, please!" Cora shrieked from the crowd, dropping to her knees, her face twisted in tears of absolute terror. "Don't kill him! We're sorry! We're sorry!" I didn't even look at her. The time for mercy had ended on the executioner's altar 19 years ago. I walked toward the pinned Alpha, my bare feet leaving glowing, violet footprints on the stone. With every step I took, the raw, beautiful heat of the transformation took over my body. My bones cracked and elongated, midnight black fur erupting across my skin, pulsing with literal veins of crackling violet lightning. When I stopped in front of Jaxon, I was the Heretic Wolf. A massive, shadow-shrouded apex predator with obsidian fangs and twin violet stars for eyes. Jaxon looked up at me, his massive wolf head pinned against the rock. The manic rage in his golden eyes finally died, replaced by a deep, hollow and pathetic realization of his own doom. He didn't see a curse anymore, he saw his executioner. I bared my fangs, a jewel-toned haunting growl vibrating deep within my chest. I raised my massive, black-clawed paw, letting the arcane energy gather at the tips until the lightning was a deafening hiss in the quiet plaza. "For the Omegas you starved," I thought, locking eyes with him. "For the lineage you poisoned with your pride. And for me." I brought my claws down. A sharp, violent arc of violet lightning tore through the clearing as my claws ripped across Jaxon's throat. A single, choked wheeze escaped his massive jaws before his golden eyes went entirely dark, the light of his Alpha lineage extinguishing forever. Crack! The moment Jaxon's heart stopped, a visible, cosmic shockwave ripples through the entire plaza. The invisible, spiritual pack bond connecting every member of the Bloodmoon Pack snapped violently. A collective groan of agony rose from the crowd, as the remaining wolves clutched their heads, their internal compasses shattered, their hierarchy destroyed. They were no longer a pack, they were refugees. As the massive golden body of the dead Alpha began to dissolve into grey ash, the greasy black film on the flagstones began to recede. The green-tinged fire died completely, replaced by the clean, cool mountain air. The land was no longer rotting, the tyrant was dead, and the bedrock was finally free. I shifted back into my human skin, my chest heaving as the violet light settled quietly back beneath my flesh. Malakai walked up beside me, his towering frame casting a massive protective shadow over my body. He didn't say a word, but his storm-grey eyes were burning with an intense savage pride that made my core ache with a dark primal hunger. He unbuckled his long, fleece-lined duster coat and draped it gently over my bare shoulders, his large, warm hand settling firmly on the back of my neck. He turned to face the hundreds of trembling, leaderless wolves standing in the plaza. "Your Alpha is dead," Malakai's gravelly baritone boomed, carrying a terrifying absolute authority that made every single survivor bow their head straight to the dirt. "The Bloodmoon Pack is dissolved. From this night forward, these lands belong to the shadows. Kneel before your new sovereign, or follow your Alpha into the ash." One by one, starting with the highest-ranking beaters and ending with the weeping Cora, the survivors dropped to both knees, lowering their foreheads against the cold stone flagstones. I stood at the center of the plaza, wrapped in Malakai's coat, my violet eyes sweeping over the kingdom that had once built itself on my suffering. I wasn't an abomination hiding in the weeds anymore. I was the Heretic Queen. And my reign had just begun. Wow. What an incredible journey, from a broken Omega left to die in the dirt, to the absolute sovereign of the Whispering Crags. Seraphina and Malakai have officially claimed their throne. The Bloodmoon Pack will never be the same again. And honestly, Alpha Jaxon got exactly what he deserved. If you enjoy the story, smash that subscribe button, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new release. We have so many more dark, addictive romance audiobooks lined up for you, and you won't want to miss a single chapter. Share this video with your fellow werewolf romance lovers. Let's grow our pack together. And most importantly, drop a comment below. I want to know your favorite moment. Was it Seraphina's terrifying first shift into the Heretic Wolf? Or the exact moment Malakai wrapped her in his coat and claimed her as his queen? Let me know. Thank you so much for listening tonight. Curl up, stay safe in the mist, and I'll see you in the next story.